So here's the thing. Doug lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and spends his summers in Maine. So you would think that he's used to being cold, right? So last night I took him to the botanical gardens to see the electric illumination, and he whipped out at me at 8:30. It was so cold. I dragged him over to Virtue's and poured red wine into him. It was great. Anyway, we're delighted to see you. And you've come to us from Durango, Colorado, where it was really serious snow, right?
Beautiful snow and minus 6 degrees, so a little cooler than it was here.
It was.
But only a little.
So now we need to find Lincoln Child and welcome him. So I'm assuming he's going to come up as he usually does on the big screen behind us. And by the way, while we're doing that, Happy New Year to everybody. And thank you so much for
Happy
coming.
New Year. Oh.
Hi. Any moment now. I think all of you think that Lincoln is actually like, who's one of that disembodied figure that shows up and, you know, he's not a real person, he's just a head that shows up.
Okay, should I open it up?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't hear any microphone.
Hello, Lincoln. We can hear you. There you are. Yay! Happy New Year, dear. It's lovely to see you.
Hi, Link.
You know, Barbara, you look wonderful, but I can't hear anything you're saying.
All right.
Try that.
Should we start over? Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me, Link? He's
not
very happy
looking
he
like
can't
a
hear
person
me.
that can hear. Do we need to coach him?
I don't know what's going on. One moment.
All right. Wait, hang on. Is he doing this on purpose? Sometimes he does this.
Yeah, Link's just faking us out here.
Okay.
This is kind of a kludge, but maybe I could use that fellow's phone to hear what you have to say. Then I could.
I thought it was done through.
Yeah, it should be. I don't know what.
It should be through your computer. Well, he can't hear me.
Lincoln,
so what's the point?
your microphone isn't muted, is it? Oh, he doesn't know.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear us now? No.
Yes. Do me a favor, Barbara. Ask him to call me back one more time. Then I won't need to use my phone. I can do it on my screen.
Okay. All right. This is actually just a test case for this delightful gentleman running the Skype thing. Well, I'll tell you about the postcard. So everybody noticed that if you bought your book, you got this wonderful postcard, Vintage Miami, which, Doug, was your inspiration, right?
That's right.
And it has on the back, when you get a chance to read it, a very cool message from Agent AXL Pendergast. So here's your first question for tonight. What does AXL stand for? Come on.
That's right.
Aloysius.
Zingu,
Right.
or Jingu,
Yep.
Pendergast, and the L, we're not sure about that.
L's
Pendergast
just
hasn't shared that
decoration.
information with us.
It
Some
just
people
makes
claim
what, a
it's-
sexier signature to have 3 letters rather than 2.
Yes, well, some people claim it's Lang, but Pendergast has disavowed that.
Does anyone actually call him Aloysius?
Constance.
That's what I thought, right, it was indeed.
But
Why
everyone's afraid to, no one knows what to call him. You know, D'Augusta calls him Pendergast, but other people don't know what to call him because they don't want to call him by his first name, and they don't want to call him by his last name because that sounds rude. And if they're friends, they don't want to say Agent Pendergast because that sounds so formal. So most of the characters don't call him anything at all.
So, in the new book, which we'll talk about when we manage to catch Lincoln, there's a whole new formality in his relationship with the FBI. So is the uptight, button-down agent in New York who's going to give him all this trouble. Gonna call him Agent Pendergast. Hey, you.
He calls him Agent Pendergast or just simply Pendergast.
So he does.
But,
Yes.
right.
Wait, we got Lincoln back? We're not sure.
You may recall from the
People of Earth, I come in peace. Give me your fluoride and I will leave.
I know what I was thinking of. I was thinking of the Great Oz. That's what I was thinking of. Remember in the Dorothy and the Wizard?
Yes.
You know, there's this big head behind the curtain and all. That's Lincoln. Yay!
I apologize. The sound is really awful. It's sort of coming through that iPhone there onto my computer, and so you'll just have to let me know when I should speak, and I'll talk for several minutes, which is my favorite way of talking.
So this is going to be uninterrupted Lincoln Child?
Yes, basically.
This is going to be uninterrupted Lincoln Child?
That's better. Okay, yes, now I'll be uninterrupted. Yep.
All right. Well, let me start over again, Lincoln. I wish you a very happy New Year. We're delighted to see you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and Barbara and Doug. I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Well,
I assure you that I will fire my entire staff after the.
Well, the good news is you look great, and I especially like your shirt, which leads me to what I wanted to ask you first, which is, why is this book set in Florida, and where are you at this moment?
I am in sunny Florida at this moment. Actually, it's not so sunny right now, but the reason the book is set in Florida is because Doug and I always try to write books in places we know about, and we've written plenty in New York. We've written a few in New Mexico and in parts of Maine, and Florida seemed like a great place, ripe for the picking, since it was another spot where Pendergast is way, way, way out of his comfort zone. And as Doug can tell you, in this book, we really wanted to push him out of his comfort zone, not only in terms of locale, but in terms of operating procedures.
Well, that's right. Pendergast, you may recall from the last book that Pendergast's protege or his mentor in the FBI lost his head. And so Pendergast is suddenly exposed, and he has no protector in the FBI, and a new guy comes in named Pickett. And Pickett is really a by-the-book kind of guy, and he wants to rein in this rogue agent who's been, his problem with Pendergast isn't that the man doesn't solve cases, because he does. The problem is that he never brings in the perps to trial. They all end up dead. So he's going to rein Pendergast in. So he has a plan to do it, and the plan involves a junior agent named Cold Moon, who is assigned as Pendergast's partner. And this is not something that pleases Pendergast very much, because he likes, as you all know, he likes to operate on his own. So there's an interesting dynamic between these two, and I don't want to tell you how it unfolds, but it gets a little feisty at times.
So you've got the phone, so he can hear you better than me. So
Did you hear
tell
what I
us.
was saying, Lincoln? Can you hear me?
Yeah, when you shove the phone back and forth, I can hear each of you individually.
All right.
Well, I'll tell you what.
Okay.
I'll talk to Doug, and Doug can talk to you.
1 second.
Right?
Doug,
Yeah.
they changed the camera so I could see you now, and I just wanted to let you know that I like that outfit you're rocking. It's really
Well, thank you. I think that your Hawaiian shirt is quite lovely. I
Luckily,
commend your
couldn't hear
excellent
that.
taste.
It looks like you have glasses to match too, but very sharp.
Yeah, Oh yeah, well, as the song goes, let me put on my sunglasses so I can see better. Right?
Oh, wow, there's the Florida look. I love it. So if you keep the phone, I'll talk to you and you can talk to him because I think he can hear you better.
Okay.
Tell us about Agent Cold Moon. He's a really interesting addition to the series. What's his background?
Well, that's very interesting. You know, he became a character in a weird sort of way, almost the way Pendergast became a character, in the sense that we didn't sit down and plan him out and say, here's, list all his characteristics and what he looks like. We often do that with other characters. But we started talking about Cold Moon. Well, first of all, it was my idea that he is Lakota. Half Lakota, half Italian.
Half Lakota, half Italian?
Yeah, that's right.
That's a wild mix.
Yeah, it is. It is a good mix. Well, and he had an Italian mother and a Lakota father, and he had a wonderful Italian mother, very, very Italian, from the southern part of Italy, by name of Esposito, or as they say in Italian, Esposito. And then his father was Lakota, and his name. So we were talking about this character, and we said, well, all right, so he's Lakota. So what if he claims that one of his ancestors was the one who killed Custer? Because it turns out that when you talk to Lakota people, many of them say, well, it was my great-great-grandfather who killed Custer. The fact is that Custer was killed by. When they found his body, there must have been 100 arrows in it, so everyone was taking a shot at it. So anyway, so the character kind of evolved from there, and maybe Lincoln will talk a little bit, because I was the one who came up with the idea of his background, but then Lincoln was the one who came up with many of the ideas of who he actually is as a person. And it was brilliant how he did this. Well, maybe I should let Lincoln talk about it.
I'd be happy to talk about how brilliant it was. As Doug said, he had the idea of what Cold Moon's background would be, but we had real disagreements about how the book would begin, because not so much in terms of me wanting to go in a certain direction and Doug wanting to go in another direction, but in terms about just how to play out the character of Cold Moon, I really felt it was important to show Cold Moon through Pendergast's eyes in the opening chapters, so that and the reader's eyes also, and thus, as usual, let people think, here's another bumbling FBI agent, straight-laced, with a crew cut that Pendergast is going to run circles around. I tried to explain this, and I did a poor job of doing it to Doug, and he said, we can't make him look dumb. I mean, this is the introduction of a major character. And I said, well, let me try and write the first 5 or 6 chapters, and see if I can't show you what I mean about having Pendergast faked out by this guy. And so I set the second chapter in the steam room, where people are just wearing towels, as usually happens, and Pendergast comes in fully dressed in his black suit, as usual, and it was a great opportunity to really sort of show Pendergast in out of his element, but behaving in a very Pendergastian way. And we then introduced Cold Moon in that same scene, and we then went on to show how Cold Moon very quietly preempted a lot of what Pendergast planned to do. Pendergast had planned to sort of fake somebody he was interviewing into a corner, and Cold Moon beat him to it, and then proceeded to explain to Pendergast how he had seen everything Pendergast had seen, and then he knew exactly what Pendergast was planning to do, and in his own quiet way, he scooped him. And that was the beginning of a tempestuous, but at the end, very satisfying relationship. And it was also an example of how sometimes, no matter how many times you work with another author, sometimes you just have to see it on paper to see if it'll work. And it could have been that Doug would have said that this sucks, we have to try a different approach. But luckily it didn't. It did suck or it didn't? Oh, let me guess. It sucked until you rewrote it, right? Yeah, okay.
No, I was going to say that in the first chapter, so Lincoln said, let me just write this down and see what you think. So I was reading the first chapter, and they're in the steam room, and Pendergast enters wearing his black suit, and that was great. I loved it. And Cold Moon is sitting off to one side, and Pendergast doesn't realize at first that this man is going to be his new partner. And so when Pickett introduces Cold Moon to Pendergast, Cold Moon stands up and drops his towel to shake Pendergast's hand. And I said, Link, I love this scene, but he's not going to drop his towel. I mean, I know you think that that's wonderful, but I don't.
However, let me add that I thought one of the great things is that Pendergast is there in the steam room in his black suit and his white shirt and all, but never breaks a sweat. He remains cool and icicle throughout the entire thing, right? You make a point of that.
That's right. Pendergast likes the heat. He doesn't like the cold. So he doesn't mind being in Florida because of the heat. He hates the traffic. But at a certain point, they have to go to northern Maine, and this is March. They have to go to northern Maine to examine a crime scene in some godforsaken motel way up, in Katahdin, Maine. And so Pendergast shows up in this parka with this stovepipe hat. I mean, it looks like he's wearing a stovepipe on his head. And very unhappy with the cold.
That was my chance to get back at Doug for his many, many, many New Jersey cracks when I was a resident of Jersey. I set this in the most backwoods, illiterate place imaginable. Probably about 5 miles from your house, right, Doug?
Yeah. That's right, where I've been sawing logs and chopping wood.
Actually, Katahdin was a made-up town. There's a famous mountain there, of course, where the AT starts, but there's no town of that name.
So the book starts out in New York, where Pendergast is getting the bad news from the new FBI guy, that he's going to have a partner. What sends them off to Florida? What's the case that prompts them to have to go to Miami?
Well, it's a very strange case. Pendergast is chosen because of his specialty in very bizarre psychological crimes that involve an extremely unusual psychological component. So basically, a human heart, is found on a grave in a cemetery in Miami, and then they find the person that the heart was taken from dead on the beach in Miami Beach. And so so they send Pendergast down with Cold Moon to cover this murder because there's certain reasons why the FBI has to be involved. And Pendergast, it turns out that this heart was left on the grave of a woman who committed suicide. And there's a note of condolence left with it. So sorry about what happened, with a little literary quotation, verses from the dead, for the dead. So Pendergast becomes seemingly obsessed with finding out why this woman committed suicide, what happened. And Cold Moon and Pickett are saying, well, who cares why this woman committed suicide? We have a murder to solve. This woman committed suicide 11 years ago. It was an open and shut case. It's obvious suicide. You don't need to go to Maine to look at this, to investigate this suicide. And so that's where both Cold Moon and Pendergast sort of go off the rails in different directions with how this case should be pursued. With Pickett, Pendergast's superior, getting more and more pissed off.
So Lincoln, which one of you thinks up, what we could call the instigating incident, or which one of you comes up with the idea of putting a human heart on the grave of a suicide? Could you hear me? Maybe Doug needs to repeat it.
So Barbara's
Doug,
asking.
can you bounce that to me? I didn't hear what Barbara said.
Barbara's asking, why did we think up the idea of putting a human heart on a grave? Where did that come from?
I believe there was, and Doug, I hate to throw this question back to you, but wasn't there a real case that involved similar occurrences?
Well, actually, we were, to a certain extent, we were mining the case of the monster of Florence.
Right.
I don't want to go into too much detail about that. It's too awful, but the monster took souvenirs from his victims, not human hearts, but other souvenirs. And the FBI database on serial killers does indicate that many serial killers who take pieces of the bodies of the people they kill often then later leave those pieces on that person's grave. Yeah,
I
that's.
thought they did it more for trophies, put them in a shoebox in the closet or
They
something.
do. They often take them as trophies, but then sometimes months or even years later, take the withered trophy and leave it on the grave as this weird kind of psychological thing. And it's not. And it's a number of serial killers have done that. And so that's what gave us the idea of leaving a heart on the grave. Although we don't know of any specific case where that actually did happen. It's not.
But that's why we like the idea. We like the idea of having these body parts, in particular hearts, left on the graves of suicides, because that added an extra wrinkle to the story. It made no sense. These people were clearly suicides. Why would somebody who leave these hearts, not anything else, only hearts, with very sad notes of expressions of remorse and sympathy on the graves of people who committed suicide 8 years ago. And so it allowed us to wrap one mystery inside another, and it also allowed us to send Pendergast all over the country trying to solve these.
Well, it also sends him all around Miami, and I thought it was interesting the way that. Did you locate actual cemeteries in Miami? Because there's several cemeteries involved in this.
Yeah, those are all real. The entire geography of the book is real, especially the traffic. Lincoln was in charge of that since he lives down there. And also, Lincoln and I did do a research trip to Miami to investigate, the scenes of we did a lot of investigating, and it was a very difficult, onerous research trip. We had to stay at the Fontainebleau Hotel for Pendergast stays, and we had to eat at the restaurants that Pendergast eat at, and drink the wines that he would normally drink. I'm telling you, it was very difficult.
I want to know why you didn't send it to Joe's Stone Crab House, which my husband will tell you is by far the best restaurant in Miami and home to the really great key lime pie of this country. So why didn't he go there? Is he not a sweets eater?
Barbara's asking you, Link, why didn't you send Pendergast to
Joe's Stone Crab House?
Joe's Stone Crab House. What's the matter? Isn't that
It's an
place you
icon.
want to?
We didn't want to give that place away to any of the readers. But it's funny because I've been to South Beach many times and driven past the Fontainebleau, and while it's not the hippest place in Miami Beach, it's certainly one of the most iconic. That's the place where Goldfinger opens up, with a helicopter wide shot, and it's just a beautiful hotel, and it seemed like a perfect place for Pendergast to stay. But I think what was most interesting for Doug anyway was when we drove across Florida. Florida is by and large, the two coasts are very populated, and the East Coast has a lot of traffic, as Doug said. But if you go across Route 75 over Alligator Alley, there's really nothing there except alligators. And the farther we went, heading towards Naples, the more alligators we saw. And Doug was like, "Oh, my God, it was just, there were literally hundreds and hundreds lying just in the culvert along the side of the highway, lying on top of each other, lying in pools. And it was a shocking sight, wouldn't you say, Doug?
It was, and we actually went off the highway and explored some of these little crazy dying towns in the middle of the Everglades. Really strange towns that we didn't want to spend too much time in.
It doesn't take long to get away from civilization, and I hear people around where I live say, they've had people in kayaks say, let's go out kayaking at night, down into the swamp or into the bayou, and people who've done it will never do it again, because once they paddle off into a bayou and they turn their flashlights on, they see thousands of red eyes all staring back at them, and they realize it's probably not a good place to spend too much time.
Yeah, so we really did do our research on that. The Fontainebleau and the Everglades, and what else did we? Oh, South Beach itself. I'd never been to South Beach in Miami, and Lincoln said, "We got to go. We're going to set some scenes in South Beach at night." So we have to go there at night and take a look at the crowd. And, oh my God, I couldn't believe it. It's just,
Do you know, when we checked into a hotel in South Beach, which I picked sort of out of the blue, there was a very large gentleman in front of us, and we figured that the sheer weight of the gold jewelry that was hanging out, we couldn't imagine how he was standing upright. It would have brought an average person to their knees, just holding it all up. It is really flashy.
yeah, it's crazy. There are these hawkers that sit outside. Come on in, have a drink, and there are drunk people everywhere, staggering around. Crowds, the traffic is moving at 5 inches an hour, and it's unbelievable and wonderful. It made a wonderful setting, or multiple settings, for the novel. So
It really would. And I will tell you as a little treat that the best way to see South Beach is to get up like at 7 in the morning, because all those people that were out all night finally have gone to bed. And you have a chance to actually, because there's some great architecture there. There's a lot of beautiful Art Deco architecture in South Beach, but you can't really see it at night through people in the lights, but you can see it in the daytime. Bet Lincoln can't hear anything here.
yeah, Lincoln. So Barbara was saying we should have gone to South Beach at 7 in the morning. Where we could
It's
have.
like 42nd Street at 7 in the morning. But it was pretty dangerous there. I got separated from Doug for about 3 hours that night. When he made it back to the hotel, he was wearing a potato sack and a purple wig. And I never really remember what happened after, a couple hours.
Research, this hawker told me to come on in, have a drink in the house.
So there's another character introduced in this book, in addition to Cold Moon. Do you want to tell us about? Well, I don't even want to. You should give his name out. It's a spoiler if I do.
Oh, Smithback?
Yeah, there's another Smithback, people.
How many people have actually read the book? How many people are upset that Smithback died? Is anybody not upset and glad that he was died?
That's so interesting. I'm glad you asked that question.
Well, so it turns out that Smithback, it is a bit of a spoiler, but Smithback has a brother
Called Roger.
Roger, and Roger shows up.
So again, I'm going to
Much
ask
to
this.
Pendergast's consternation.
Right. So another question for Lincoln. Which one of you thought of bringing back Roger, and what was your motivation there?
Lincoln, who thought of bringing back a Smithback?
I believe that was my idea, but we can fight about it if you like. I'm pretty sure that you had told me many times, and rightly so, that we were probably wrong to kill him off, just because it seemed like the pain wasn't going away and we were still being blamed for it. And I thought, why don't we bring back Smithback in a way, resurrect him as a journalist, and have him in a funny way, be like his brother in certain ways, has the same mannerisms and the same kind of hairstyle, but in other ways be completely different. And I thought that perhaps if we pulled it off, the very discrepancy between the two brothers would honor the memory of the late, great Bill Smith back. So you readers will have to judge whether we succeeded or not.
Okay, but I've got the phone, so maybe you can hear me at the moment then. It seems to me, Lincoln, as your editorial background and all might lead you to agree or disagree with me, depending. If you're writing a long-term series, in real life, people move on, people die, people change, all the rest of it. How real is this? Is book 18 in your series, so wouldn't it be realistic that you would have lost at least one or two major characters, obviously not Pendergast, along the way?
Yes, it is, and it's funny because at first I was keeping a record of how much time was passing in the books, because if you start from Relic and go ahead, you can see one book ends in the fall, the next book begins in the spring, and I could rapidly see that while 25 years of our own lives were passing, only about 6 years were passing in the Pendergast universe. And you really come up against a very difficult question, and that is, do you want to kill off, the longer the series goes on, and the more people get attached to characters, if you have no end in sight, if you're not writing a Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, do you really want to? Who do you dare kill off? And who was fair to kill off? And who was realistic to kill off? And who do you just simply feel that it's not fair to the readers to get rid of? It's a difficult question, and I think that Doug and I find it more difficult the more books we write with Pendergast involved.
Well, I do think it's a difficult question, but I also think that you readers can get too complacent if you think everybody is safe. There has to be a certain amount of suspense, worry.
That's very true. It's very true, and that's one reason we killed off Smith back. As Doug can tell you, he felt, and I felt, that if we got rid of Smith back, nobody would be safe. And Doug said, we're going to have to be really sure that people know he's dead and he isn't going to spring back to life in the last page of the book. And so we had a really horrible autopsy scene, showing the evisceration of Bill Smith back and everything else. And so there's no question that he's dead. But you're right, and it's something that we struggle with each book. Cold Moon himself became a much more sympathetic character to us as the book went on, and we liked him more and more to the point where, I don't want to give anything away, but that became that exact question we had to struggle with. Here's a character who could become a big part of the series going forward, maybe even take DeAugusta's place. Do we want to keep him around? Do we want to get rid of him to make a more satisfying or more realistic story, as you say? Because people do get sick, people do die in real life, and how do we keep our readers happy and yet keep them thinking our world has verisimilitude to it?
I think Preston lost, I won't mention names.
He's lost at least one person close to him, and nearly lost another person close to him. So,
I think it's just part of life, if that's what you're writing about. Now, you did have didn't we call it like the Helen trilogy? Was there? I'm trying to remember, but there have been story arcs within the larger story of Pendergast. So, Cold Moon could be possibly the start of a different story arc, this book is kind of a resting place in that, we're not sure yet whether it's going to take off in a new arc or whether this is like a pause before something goes on.
Well, it's a good question. Lincoln and I are now discussing the next Pendergast novel, and we're working up a plot, and we're actually wondering if Cold Moon is going to make an appearance or not. We don't know quite yet if that's going to happen. So those of you who have read the book, should Cold Moon make a return as Pendergast? Yes. There you have it, Lincoln.
Okay,
So-
well,
Let's talk about something fun in the book. There must be something fun besides suicides and evisceration. And, you know, the steam room, that was fun. But is there another element of fun somewhere in the book?
No, there's no fun at all. It's all horrible, serious. Well, there is a certain, you know, Cold Moon, you know, I spent some time, quite a bit of time on the Navajo Indian Reservation. And as those of you who have spent time out there know, when you go into a Navajo house or a hogan or whatever, there's always a pot of coffee boiling on the wood stove. And whenever the water level gets low, they put more water in and more grounds, and you get a really incredibly peculiar and strong coffee, because it sometimes is boiling for a week before they finally dump the grounds out and put fresh grounds in. So this is Cold Moon's, this is the only kind of coffee he can drink. He loves it. And so the coffee's got to have been boiling for hours before he wants to drink it. Now we all know that Pendergast is a fearful snob when it comes to coffee. And so they have terrible conflicts about coffee. At one point, Pendergast buys Cold Moon a cup of Starbucks. He says, well, this may not be the best, but it's a nice espresso, and Cold Moon tastes it and then pours the cup out into a snowbank. Then he offers Pendergast his coffee, and Pendergast tastes it and comments on it in a uniquely Pendergastian way.
So presumably they're in Maine where it's snowing and not Miami.
That's right, yes.
This is part of the book, right? So what are you working on next? Are we working on another Pendergast, or is something else going to happen?
Lincoln, why don't you tell them what about our next book, Old Bones?
yes, I'd be happy to. As a matter of fact, we just turned it into our editor today. The next, as many of you may know, we've been running with our friend Gideon Crew for several books, and he had a ticking clock, and we decided we would let that clock run its course, unless, of course, we hear from a large movie studio sometime in the near future, which may make a difference. And we were looking at other characters that were favorites of ours that perhaps we could use to found a new series on. And it didn't take us long to hit upon two people who we thought were both very popular among our readers and that we cared for a lot ourselves. One was Corey Swanson, who has been involved in several of the Pendergast books. First as a young goth in Still Life with Crows, where she was both a thorn in the side of Pendergast and an invaluable asset. And later on, most ironically, she became an FBI agent herself, in large thanks to Pendergast. And we thought we could pair her with Nora Kelly, who was a heroine of Thunderhead, and who was married to Bill Smith back, and is now his widow, and back in New Mexico, working at the Institute of Archaeology in Santa Fe. So we felt that with Corey's youth and brashness and kind of a distrust of authority, and yet melded to having to put on a front as an FBI agent and act accordingly, you know, bringing that and her skills as a forensic, is she what, forensic?
Forensic pathologist.
It's pathologist, right? Yeah. With Nora's skills as a physical anthropologist, as an archaeologist, we could have two perfect women to solve mysteries in some of the areas of the country, the Southwest primarily, where we've had some of our biggest successes in the past. So Old Bones is the story of how they sort of come together and unwillingly at first find they have to work together to solve this mystery before they themselves end up as victims of the crimes. And it has a nice twist to it, which involves the Donner Party, which as you probably remember, is the party that was lost in a snowstorm going over the Sierras to California in 1846, and it was forced to cannibalism. And there are a lot of mysteries still surrounding that party, and we added to those mysteries ourselves in great measure in making the backstory for our book. And Doug and I were really worried for a long time that the idea of turning the Donner Party into a modern-day thriller, we'd get scooped in the last 12 months. But we seem to have made it.
Well, you might be surprised to know that although Relic and, I'm trying to remember, what's the other two, your two books that have made the list of like 100 best thrillers, was it?
Relic and Cabinet of Curiosities.
Cabinet of Curiosities, right. That forever, Thunderhead was the best-selling of your books for us, partly because, of course, it's a Southwestern mystery. I've always loved it, so I think it'll be wonderful to have Nora back.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's quite an interesting story. It's very, very complex. The Verses for the Dead is quite a complex novel. We had a lot of challenge. There was a huge challenge in us constructing that plot and making sure that all the pieces fit together. And we had to create charts for ourselves and maps and all kinds of things in order to make sure that the plot was seamless and hung together, and we had to put dates, do very, very complicated arrangement of dates. And those of you who, when you read the book, you will see why the dates become so important. So the Donner book, The Old Bones, is a similar puzzle, putting it together. Very, very intricate and complex kind of plot, but we hope very satisfying. Not hard to follow, just very, very carefully put together so that everything comes together at the end.
So there was a slightly surreal quality to the afternoon for the Poison Pen staff as we're shoving thousands of books past to sign. Lincoln would call, and these really bizarre conversations would ensue because they were figuring out the last of the plot bits. Or Lincoln would call and say, what about, the gold mine? And Doug would start in, and we're all sitting there going, what are they talking about?
No, it's interesting. It's
It was
true.
funny.
Yeah, what happened, the book is due. We submitted the book today, about an hour ago, to our publisher. Nowadays you just email the book in. So, but Lincoln called me while I was signing, and he said, on November 15th, the depth of the snow is 6 feet. And then on January 1st, it's 18 feet. And on January 15th, it's 21 feet. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, yes, this is part of the puzzle of the book, is the depth of the snow in 1847 at various points of time. And it's a crucial point. I'm not giving away any spoiler here. You aren't going to understand what I'm talking about until the very last chapter of Old Bones, when Pendergast shows up. Oh God, maybe I did have a spoiler there. But Pendergast shows up at this.
I never should have started this track. I'm so sorry.
All right, well, I might as well go to the bitter end here. No, I'm not going to give anything else away except to say that, so Pendergast, the novel is about an archaeological excavation of one of the Donner campsites where they find all the bones from the people who were been eaten and cannibalized, cooked and eaten. And so this is based on the truth. There actually have been archaeological excavations of the Donner campsites where they have really put together, really gotten a lot of interesting information of excavating these sites. So we just simply mined the actual archaeology for this book. But at the very end, Pendergast shows up and he starts asking all the questions about the depth of snow on what dates, and everyone's saying, what the heck is he asking these questions for?
Don't
These are
tell
the
us.
craziest questions. I'm not going to tell you why he's asking those questions, but it turns out that that's a crucial point.
Did you actually look it up? I mean, is there like an almanac or something that would
Yes.
record it?
Yes, there is. We did. In fact, I reviewed this book. The idea for this book came because the New York Times asked me to write a review of a book about the Donner tragedy.
Was that the Alma Katsu's book? The
No,
Hunger?
it was it was a nonfiction book.
Oh, okay.
A nonfiction book, and it was a very, very good book. And I was reading this book thinking, my God, this is the craziest story. I mean, this is really horrifying. And so Lincoln and I started talking about how to turn it into a novel. And so we decided, well, it'll all take place in the modern age, an archaeological excavation, which will, things will go awry. So, but yes. So we did a tremendous amount of research, and we did research the snow depths and things like that.
Would you ask Lincoln what he's working on? Because he writes books on his own, just like you do.
Lincoln, what book are you cheating on with me at the present
Excuse
time?
me, Doug?
Lincoln, what book are you working on now?
Oh, I'm working on the next Pendergast book.
How about a solo book? Do you have a solo book in mind?
I do have a solo book with my hero, the enigmologist Jeremy Logan. I'm taking my time on this one. I want to, I was so happy with the results of some of the earlier ones, Deep Storm and Full Wolf Moon. I am waiting to write this one so that it's perfect, and or near perfect as I can make it. And I'm hemming and hawing because I don't want to give the plot away, basically, and I can't think of a single word that won't give it away. But it is in progress, and I hope you will see it very soon, and I will be sitting in that seat where you are now, Doug, and we'll take it.
I've really loved the Jeremy Logan books. I think, have any of you read them? Yeah, I think they're wonderful. So it'll be great to have a new one. Doug, what are you working on your own? Are you thinking about something to do, maybe a follow-up to The Lost City of the Monkey God?
Well, I'm always looking at possible nonfiction books, and I've got some ideas. And in fact, in the next couple of months, an article will be coming out in the New Yorker magazine, which I wrote a long time ago, and they've been holding it for various reasons that I won't go into, interesting reasons. So that should be coming out in a couple of months.
Great. Would you pass me the postcard? I wanted to mention before we open up questions for the audience that we're going to try an experiment at the store. Doug has asked me twice now. He said, do you think that the address on the postcard is the real address of the FBI agency in Albuquerque, New Mexico? There's even a stamp printed on the postcard. So we're going to put a real stamp on this postcard and mail it. And see what happens.
Yeah, the next thing that's going to happen is they're going to be knocking on your door. May we speak with Ms. Barbara Peters, please?
Well, it says FBI Field Office, New Mexico. I mean, it's an interesting question. I once had, Judy Van Giesen, who's an Albuquerque author, once asked me if she could use, I'm trying to remember something, how she put it. She wanted to borrow something of mine to put in her book. So when the book came out, I'm reading along, and there's a big chase scene, and there's something that all goes on, and you have to read the license plate of the car. And so I went right by it and read the license plate of the car, and I thought, wait a minute. So I went back, and in fact, it was my license plate that she had used. And I mean, that wasn't a particularly bad thing, but there have been instances where authors have made up phone numbers, but it turns out to be somebody's actual number, and problems ensue. So it'd be kind of fun to see who actually lives at, if anybody, 4200, whatever this is, Park Avenue Northeast, South New Mexico, or whether they were smart enough to look it up and find out it was an empty lot before they put it
Yeah, the address was added at the last minute by the publisher,
Right.
and I haven't had a chance to ask him, where the heck did you get that address?
Well, there actually is a bank or something that accepts mail for 221B Baker Street in London, which is not a real place. So I just, thought it'd be fun to find out. So what do you think? Should we take questions from the audience?
Yes,
All
absolutely.
right. So if you have a question for Lincoln, Doug can relay it.
He's actually.
Oh, sorry.
First, the address you were speaking of, what address was it?
It's the FBI field agency in Albuquerque, New Mexico that's on the
Is that
postcard.
the Luking Avenue or whatever it
Yeah,
is?
Looking Avenue, Park Avenue.
Yeah, that's correct. I looked that up.
So we're going to be in trouble with the FBI.
What?
Link, is this your idea to put the real FBI address on this postcard?
No, it wasn't, but I thought it was better than putting the address of a poor blind woman who lived 2 doors down.
I think we should have put your address on it.
All right, so
No, we
questions?
I think I'm gonna go hide on the Navajo reservation for a while.
Maybe it's a
That's
good
all
thing. Any questions? Yes.
Okay, I was wondering, this is, in this book, it was your second reference that I can remember about Custer, and I just wondered if either one of you were interested in that subject or anything more than that, because we come from his hometown,
Oh, you do?
yeah,
Oh.
in Michigan. So.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. No, I'm very interested in Custer. Yeah. No, I mean, he's a very interesting person. I mean, whether you like him or don't like him, he's very complex, interesting. In fact, I've been reading a biography of Custer by T.J. Stiles that won the Pulitzer Prize last year. It's excellent. I think it's called, oh God, I've forgotten the name. It's something like The Trials of Custer or something like that. But
He had a pretty challenging marriage, too, if I recall. Wasn't Mrs. Custer somewhat of a...
Elizabeth, yeah, she was the one who was born in Monroe, and then
yeah.
moved there to be with her.
She was very attractive, and he was too. They were quite an interesting couple.
Sort of Brangelina of their day.
Yes.
Anyone else have a question?
Where is Constance going, and how old is she?
Lincoln, the question is, where is Constance going and how old is she? I'm glad I'm not going to answer that one.
How honest am I supposed to answer on this question? Constance is aging at a normal rate right now. She has a lot more years than her apparent youth would seem to show. And if you ask where she's going, I think right now she's probably on an Uber up to Riverside Drive. But in all seriousness, you notice, or people who will read the book will notice that we are very careful to keep her in the story and keep the thread alive, because it's a very tough balancing act with Constance and Pendergast. Some people want more romance, some people want less romance, some want her as a heroine, some want to see nothing more than the back of her in the distance. So we're still, and Doug and I are fighting about that too, a little bit, I think, because Doug has got a real soft spot for Corey, and I have more of a soft spot for Constance. So, maybe there'll be a big tournament, some arena fight or something between the two of them and see who wins.
Lincoln has the hots for Constance. What's that Greek myth, the fellow who fell in love with the sculpture he created? Well, that's
It's Pygmalion,
Pygmalion. Well, that's
also called My Fair Lady.
right. That's Link's problem with Constance.
This lady is dying to ask something.
Or comment.
So along the same line, are we going to hear more about the son that Constance had with Diogenes in the future? Because I think he'd be a really interesting character.
Yes. Are we going to hear more about the son that Constance had by Diogenes? Yes, 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 absolutely. He
No
is
spoilers.
Really
This is sort of like talking to John Sanford. Every once in a while, we have John at the store and he runs out of things to say. He reveals the entire plot of his forthcoming book. And then we have to like wish we could cut it out and not have him. Or sometimes he invites the audience to help him with a plot point.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's a good one.
I know, he's so deeply immersed in it.
Link, would you like to invite the audience to help us with a plot point on our next book?
I'd be delighted.
All right, well, go ahead, ask the question then.
Are we talking about the next Pendergast book?
Well, you know, we were, Lincoln and I had a bit of
I
an
can't hear
argument.
you.
What?
He can't hear
I
you.
need your
Oh,
phone.
sorry. Lincoln and I had a bit of an argument today on the phone about, we were plotting the next Pendergast book, about how much of the supernatural should creep in. And now, so I'm going to ask the question. How much of the supernatural should creep in? How much? 1/3, 2/3, or 100%? 2/3. 2/3. Okay. So something that's left a little ambiguous in the end, but you're not absolutely sure. Well, that's good. You're gonna like Old Bones because there's a bit of there's some really interesting supernatural elements to it that are kind of creepy and yet you're not really sure if they're there or not. So
That makes a really interesting contrast with Pendergast,
Doug,
right?
do me a
'Cause-
favor and do a show of hands for one more question, and that is, how do people feel about demonic possession? Is that a frightening topic, or is that a topic that people feel is consigned to B movies?
all right, let's say raise your hand if you think that it's demonic possession is for B movies only and not for a Pendergast novel.
I don't think anything you guys could do would be on the lines of these.
All right, so then raise your hand if you're intrigued by the idea of demonic possession as an element in a Pendergast novel.
Pendergast or just in general?
A Pendergast novel.
No, but would it be he'd be possessed or would it be some other character? There's a difference.
Pendergast has already been possessed by a demon for a while. No. But you know, he comes from a very old Catholic family in New Orleans.
I feel like Conrad
And
the Magnificent
there's
up here.
definitely what?
He
What'd you
can't
say?
hear you.
What'd
He
you
can't
say?
hear you.
Need the phone.
I
You need
don't
the
know,
phone.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Repeat what you just said because I don't think people heard you.
I said I feel like Karnak the Magnificent up here. It's like an out-of-body experience. I can see the top half of my face, and I can see Barbara, and I can see Doug's foot. Yeah, thank you. And some mumbling in the background. So I think in my next book I'm going to write about an out-of-body experience. I think I'm just experiencing one right now. Either that or an LSD trip.
Anyone else?
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, when I was in 5th grade, I wrote a book report on the Donner Party, much to the concern of my parents and my teachers. So I think it sounds like a great topic, but I was remembering when you were here for the Pharaoh's Key, and maybe I'm imagining this, but I thought you were going to write about was it the Dyatlov Pass, or was it always the Donner Pass?
Well, you know, the Dyatlov Pass is a subject that has interested us a great deal.
Yeah.
And yes, we're also thinking about that, but that's more in the future.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
So I just forced my best friend to read Relic, and she's loving it. But she had a really interesting question, and I told her this morning, like, I don't know, but I'll ask tonight. And so she asked how the two of you can collaborate together on writing your novels.
So the question is, how do we collaborate together writing our novels? Well, I would say it's a bit like a bad marriage. I mean, the sex is no good. No, sorry, Lincoln. The way it works, it actually is a wonderful partnership we have. Lincoln lives in Florida and I live in New Mexico, so we don't actually write together. But what we do is we plot the books together like we're doing right now with the next Pendergast book. Every day, we're going to be on the phone, talking and arguing and damning each other to hell. And then we'll finally come up with a basic idea for a plot, and then we'll outline it, maybe the first 15 chapters, and then Link will take half and I'll take half, and I'll write, my beautiful, stunningly good chapters, and he will write his usual stuff, and then we trade, and then he rewrites my deathless prose, and it makes me mad, and I rewrite his leaden prose, and that makes him really mad, and then we have a big fight, and we argue. But for some reason, this process actually results in I think, a very crisp, clear writing style in which we don't really let each other get away with anything. So Lincoln will say to me, this chapter you've written, Doug, is terrible. We need to, fix it or throw it out. And after I've, calmed down, I'll realize this is why I have a partner, because he's right. And I'll do the same to him in return. So Link, so I don't know how much of that you heard. Sorry, we didn't hear that.
Can you hear this?
Yeah.
I said I heard Jack.
So the question is how we write together. And I explained how I had to rewrite everything you wrote, and really had to constantly correct your grammatical errors and spellings and so forth. And so I just wondered if you had anything to add. Nothing? Oh, good. Let's the next question.
That's exactly right. What Doug says is correct, and I think you should answer the question from now on, Doug, because I feel like that face on the wall in the 1984 Apple ad, so partner, you take over from here.
Well, what it really comes down to is that with the back and forth, you write and then he writes and so forth, what you end up with is actually a third voice, right? It's not fully your voice, it's not fully Lincoln's voice, it's a product of the fact that you have gone back and forth, and by now, actually, with 18 books, you've sort of got it all down anyway.
Well, it's strange because it's not, Lincoln and I have different styles of writing.
Yes, you do.
But the style that we have together is not a mixture of our two styles. It's a third style entirely.
That's what I said, is a third voice that is really there. I've read all the books you've written. I've read all the books that Lincoln's written, and then all the books that you've read together, and there are 3 different voices involved.
Yeah.
Lincoln, your enigmologist is a different voice than Pendergast, right?
He can't hear you.
Now I hear you.
Okay, so I said your enigmologist has a different voice than Pendergast, right?
Yes.
All right. So do you consciously change when you're writing one or the other, or does it just sort of come naturally after the time you spend?
I think it comes naturally. And I'd be curious to know how many people who read our books feel they can tell which chapters were written by Doug and which were written by me, with the obvious exception of the degree of literateness and polysyllabic words that I
Well, we
use.
can ask. How many of you can tell which, do any of you have a sense of which chapter is written by Lincoln and which is written by Doug?
Sometimes.
Just sometimes, but mostly it's just the voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Lincoln uses more adverbs than I do.
But one thing I can tell.
I was just going to tell you that
worse that most people think that it's just one voice.
Well, that's good, I think, because if there's two voices, it would be jarring. I think that voice is something that, speaking for myself, I had grown into working with Doug. Suggesting chapters to him and seeing how he puts them on page, writing chapters myself and seeing how he revises them. And just over the course of so many books together and separately, just honing our career. Even writing this book, Old Bones, it brings it home to me when I write a sentence, and I think, with a couple extra words here, I can really add to that person's personality, just by showing them do something that's unusual or unexpected. In a book. And that's not because I'm a great writer, it's just because we've done it so much that we know what to put in, what to leave out. And that carries over into our own fiction as well. I don't have a separate voice in my books, and I don't think Doug has one either.
So today you were doing the last pass at Old Bones, because you kept calling Doug to go through it. So you were doing kind of like a final edit, right?
Pass, taking out extra words, correcting errors of logic or continuity errors. The book is done. We're really happy and relieved, and we really, as always, the moment we finish it, we want to know what everybody thinks of it. So.
But is that usual that you would do the last pass, or does sometimes Doug do the last pass?
Doug writes more the first drafts of the book. I'd say statistically, and I handle more of the. Not that Doug needs it, but I handle a lot of the editorial work in the last pass, just because I am such a finicky person about cutting out those few extra words, and the shorter the book is, the happier I am. Not because it's within reason, obviously, not because it takes less time. It doesn't, but because it means that we're telling the stories, cinematically and visually, and Doug and I often hear that people come staggering to work with bags under their eyes because they couldn't sleep for wanting to read that one last chapter, and that's our job, that's our mission, that's why we walk the earth, basically, to make that happen to people.
I love it. Giants walking the earth. There they are. Too funny. In answer to your question, there's a certain amount of right and left brain thing that goes on. I always think, Lincoln comes from an editorial side and is slightly more, I can't remember which brain is which, detail, or you're a little more on the creative side.
Well, the bigger brain is mine.
There you have it. Right. Does anybody have a final question before we move to signing books?
I do, Nancy McMillan. First of all, the Orlando comment was hilarious because we stayed a few blocks from that at the last undercount. And this is Team P. We had
Yes.
900.
Hello, everybody.
And they've nominated me to ask a question.
Yes.
The St. Christopher Medal. No, St. Jude, I'm sorry, the Lost Cause, and the look between Pendergast and Constance when Mrs. Trask called him a lost cause. What was that leading to, that look?
Okay, Lincoln, you didn't hear that question. It's a question for you. The St. Jude Medal, that, there's a look that passes between Constance, and Pendergast, involving this, but when the mention is made of the St. Jude Medal.
What about it? He said defensively.
What? Wait a minute, start again, we lost the first part.
What about it? He said defensively.
Say that again, sorry.
I think he said, what about that? He said defensively.
Yeah, this is
It's
the
a
St.
very,
Jude Medal.
that's a very complicated question to answer. So, that's why I don't want to answer it. You will find out, though.
If you really want to know.
All will become clear
It'll take
20 or
about
30
15
books from
seconds.
now.
I'm not Catholic. hurricane headed towards Florida a year ago, I think it was. And at first it was going to go up the ocean, and I thought, that's, good, no one's out there. Then it was going to go up the East Coast. And I thought, well, that's too bad, but at least I don't live there. And then it was going to go up the middle. And I thought, that's too bad, really too bad. And then it was going to go right up a mile from my house. And I thought to myself, well, I'm kind of a lost cause, and so, St. Jude, if you're out there, help me out. And the hurricane veered in about 10 miles south of my house and went up the middle, and then went back out again, and we lost power for only about 1 hour. And so he's my homeboy. And I had to put him in the book because I like putting in things from our own lives into the stories. And of course, what Pendergast thinks of that metal, nobody knows. I certainly don't. But I feel that by putting things in like that, it makes the book more real to a reader, even if they don't know where it comes from. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's one of my private rules of novel writing.
That's a
And
wonderful
that's probably a
answer.
lot probably you wanted to hear on the subject.
Great.
Good question.
Would you thank Lincoln for us? We're going to bid
Lincoln?
goodbye.
Okay, Lincoln, I'm going to thank you very much for joining us. You were most charming.
I'm very sorry for the technical problems, and we will make sure they don't happen again. If you will all leave your cheese whiz by the door, I promise to depart from Pluto peacefully.
Actually, you all could hear Lincoln, right? So it was only Lincoln that couldn't hear us, right? So it all worked out. We've survived these little technical glitches before. Our big plan would be someday to get Lincoln to take the train to Phoenix. Don't you think? Maybe if we all wrote him a letter, Or maybe we'll find his address and we'll each of us send him a postcard.
I know what we'll do. We'll hire Team Pendergast to go kidnap him.
He doesn't fly, but we feel that he could possibly manage. Whoop, there he's calling back. Is that Lincoln or is that you? It is Lincoln.
Lincoln?
Put on speaker.
No, I think he's just calling Doug. You're welcome.
We're all listening to you. You want No. I'm going to cut you off right there. All right, Lincoln.
We're all used to this because whenever Doug's at the store, Lincoln is on the phone all the time. So it's kind of like a constant third person, isn't it, in the middle of it all. I want to thank you all very much for coming.
Yes,
Doug
thank
is
you very
going to
much.
migrate up to this table. Douglas, do you see where the table is here behind you? He's going to go up there and sit. And if you guys would like to line up in some fashion, if you have a red wristband on, you're in good shape, and buy a book. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you for supporting the authors, and I hope we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.